And joining us on Euronews is Commissioner Virkkunen from Strasbourg. Commissioner, thank you so much for being with us. You just came back from the Cannes Film Festival. Of course, for Europe, part of its identity is culture. What role do you see the Commission can play when it comes to film, series, overall funding for culture?
Of course, we know that culture is very much, of course, about our values. It tells what we are. It tells about our history, our culture, and it's a very important part of European identity. So, of course, the way how we can support this is very much funding, and we have proposed for next MFF Agora EU program, and there we are also providing more funding for our creative sector and for our culture, because it's very much, of course, about our identity, our values, and it's important to support this very crucial sector.
And Commissioner, since you were in Cannes, I have to ask you about what is really the story at the festival, and that is a letter from French cinema productions, companies, actors worrying about what they call as potential censorship coming from Vincent Bolloré and also the Canal Plus group. Is this something that you're monitoring?
Of course, when we speak about our creative sector and about our culture, it's of course the greatest strength of the European model. It's our freedom of expression, and it's very fundamental value for the European Union. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and this is having, of course, it's the basis for our cultural sector, for our creative sector, and also for our media. And this is also the reason why we have adopted the Media Freedom Act, really to support independent media, independent journalism, which is a cornerstone of our democracies, and we are protecting that in the European Union level.
So you say freedom of speech when it comes to the arts is essential for Europe. Just to pick up on this point, and just a final question on this issue, it has created a big storm in France. The idea that Canal Plus may now refuse to fund some films may have been blacklisted. Is this something that worries you, and who's going to make up for the shortfall? Do you believe European institutions could pay where funding is now lacking?
I think it's, of course, very important that we have always full transparency, and it has to be always clear that we are fully supporting freedom of expression and freedom of speech in our activities when it comes to media or creative sector, because this is what makes Europe strong in this field, and it's so crucial part of our fundamental values as well. So we have to protect that everywhere.
Okay, so you are monitoring this question, or is this in general?
This is, of course, in general level for what we are working all the time.
Okay, and let's talk about, of course, the tech sovereignty package, which has been delayed again. Can you explain the reasons behind this? And also, how would you define tech sovereignty? What is tech sovereignty in 2026 for you?
Commission is supposed to adopt our tech sovereignty package on the 3rd of June, so in 2 weeks' time. And this is, of course, about building our own capacity when it comes to critical sectors. But for us, the technological sovereignty doesn't mean that we are planning to work somehow in isolation in the future, but it's very important that we have certain capacity in a critical fields. And then we are also working, of course, with the like-minded partners to make sure that we don't have risky dependencies and we are not too dependent on one company or one solution, that we have always alternatives, that we are able to work in all conditions. So it's very much about building our own capacity, building more resilience for our supply chains, and working together with our partners.
What I understand from your language is that you do not want this package to be perceived as protectionist. Is that what's creating tensions with some member states and ultimately delays? You don't want anything that looks like protectionism?
I think it's very important to really also clarify that what tech sovereignty is, and it's not about protectionism, but it's also about taking care that we are not too dependent on one solutions, that we don't have that kind of risks when it comes to our very critical services, to our economy. And especially we are looking, of course, now in our tech sovereignty package, the crucial parts will be about AI and Cloud Development Act, and also about Chips Act 2.0. So these are the main elements of our package. So to make sure that we can boost our European alternatives in the cloud services, that we can invest to sustainable data centers in the European Union, and also that we have very resilient supply chains on semiconductors, and we are also able to design and manufacture also more advanced chips in the future, also AI chips. So it's very much about that. And the way how we can also boost our own European homegrown technologies, it's very much connected to public procurement, because governments and public sector is a very big customer for ICT services. So it really matters how we are buying and what kind of services we are buying. It can give a great boost for European technologies, and we should also use more strategically open source solutions to really boost our own homegrown technologies, because then we can have very lively, of course, competition and more innovations in the markets.
And I want to ask you two final questions. Speaking of AI, the head of Mistral, the European unicorn, there's a lot riding on this company. He came out recently and said the way that the European legislation is operating simply is not adaptable to real life. How do you read that criticism? And is there still room where you can negotiate and listen to more feedback from companies? His criticism was loud and clear.
I think it's very important when it comes to AI that there's a huge potential, and we want to boost really investments and innovations in this area. But in the same time, we have to be aware of risks. And I think our AI Act is very balanced one, because it's a risk-based approach. So most of the cases, there is no risk when we are using AI, or risk is very low. But when AI is using in the banking sector, in healthcare sector, into transportation, it's often also creates more risks. And those systems, they have to be tested before they are entering to the market. So we think that it's important that people can trust those technologies. But of course, we shouldn't have that kind of rules which are hindering innovations.
And just finally, there is a question that keeps coming up, which, of course, for women in Europe certainly is an issue, which is the use of AI technology on social media. A lot of these companies based in the US to present women who are naked or in situations they have not consented to. This issue has been playing out for months. You have taken measures, but they are not enough. We still see these pictures coming up week after week. What measures are you thinking? And ultimately, are you ready to hit the nuclear button and say, we will not allow you to operate in Europe if this continues?
It's clear, according to our rules, that all these service providers, they have to all the time assess and mitigate the systematic risks what they are posing. And when it comes to that kind of notification apps, we are banning them in the European Union. So it's part of our AI Act and trialogue negotiations. We concluded 2 weeks ago with the co-legislators that we decided that we are banning that kind of notification apps in the European Union.
Do you fear any backlash just finally on this from the US as a result of this? Keeping in mind, however, no one has consented to this.
I think that these are very common concerns globally now when technology is taking bigger role, that what kind of risks it's also posing. And many countries are looking towards Europe, that what kind of measures we are taking here, because with our Digital Services Act, with our Digital Markets Act, and with our AI Act, we have really also set a global benchmark that we want that we have digital environment which is safe and fair and democratic, and we are enforcing these rules. And in the same time, we want to encourage innovations and investments in this area, but we want that people can trust those technologies.
Well, Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us on Euronews.